Our gospel reading for this morning moves us ahead in the gospel a good bit. We've been hearing about the beginning of Jesus' ministry ever since the Christmas season ended. Now we skip forward midway into Mark's gospel for the celebration of the Transfiguration. Jesus has just recently been confessed as Messiah by Peter, and then has told them for the first time of his impending death on the cross. Peter has attempted to correct Jesus and has been told, "Get behind me, Satan." That was the previous event that happens just prior to today's reading and is referenced to the 6 days earlier that you'll hear in just a moment. Let us listen now for what the Spirit would say to us through these words. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased." That's the echo, and I repeated it. That's not what it says. That's what God said at the baptism of Jesus. Here God says, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly they looked around, and there was no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I recently saw an article in the USA Today entitled, "Churches Go Less Formal to Make People Comfortable." Now, this is hardly an earth-shattering concept. Our early service here is called an informal service, and in that service we have less liturgy and people generally don't dress up. But the churches in the USA Today article take it to another level. One of those congregations was a Baptist one in Florida, and it's called Church at the Gym. And as the name implies, it's in a gym. And the pastor wears jeans, and the people come in shorts and flip-flops, and there's no organ, and there's no stained glass, and nothing that might look to us like church. Another one of those congregations in the article is something called the Bridge. This non-denominational congregation is in a strip mall. And like Church at the Gym, it tries to connect with the under 40 crowd that is often underrepresented in the typical church. And it sounds like a pretty edgy place. Along with the video clips that go with the sermon, the Bridge recently opened their own tattoo parlor. Now, I feel pretty confident in saying that that wouldn't be your thing to a lot of you here. But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. You know, some of us grew up thinking real worship had to have a pipe organ. But of course, church went on for centuries and centuries before there was such a thing. Pipe organs, as we know them, only have been around for about 500 years. And the fact is that the Christian church has been adopting and adapting the culture around it since the very beginning. Early Christian worship was virtually indistinguishable from Jewish worship, but that began to change as more and more Gentiles came on board. Martin Luther is said to have used popular music, perhaps even borrowing tavern drinking songs, in order to make the hymns that he wrote more accessible. African American spirituals are another example of worship and music that developed for a particular cultural location. And the contemporary worship songs of our own day are just one more attempt to make worship accessible to popular culture. Church at the gym and the bridge may be a little more extreme examples of this, but they exist within a long history of the church doing different and new things in order to interpret itself into different contexts and locations. But in all attempts to connect the faith to the prevailing culture, whether they have a tattoo parlor or a pipe organ, there is almost always a tendency, a temptation, to domesticate God, to make God user-friendly, if you will. I'm not sure that there is any religious group or institution, or that there ever was a religious group or institution, that does not on some level try to get God on our side, to make sure that God appreciates our way of doing things, that supports our activities, to ensure that God is favorably disposed to us and our group. And even religious rituals that were originally designed with no other purpose other than to simply allow us to experience God's presence, eventually get twisted into tools for managing God. And that is why I think that any time God actually shows up, it scares the bejeebers out of people, no matter how religious they are. When God shows up, people hit the dirt. They cower in fear. They shout out, "Woe is me." And you can see that in our gospel reading for today. The disciples have been hanging out with Jesus for a while, and he's done some things that scared them a few times. But when Jesus is transfigured before three of them on the mountaintop, they are terrified. Moses and Elijah are there. Jesus' clothes whiter than is earthly possible. There's only one explanation. God is doing this. And when God actually shows up, it's not manageable, it's not user-friendly. Peter has no idea what to do, what to say, but it seems that his religious sensibilities kick in. And so he says, let's build some shrines, some memorials. Let's make this Transfiguration Day and celebrate it on a regular basis. But Peter's babbling is interrupted by a cloud that overshadows them and a heavenly voice that says, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." No religious mumbo-jumbo, no new rituals or celebrations, just this one simple command. Listen to him. And then they come down from the mountaintop, back to the day-to-day, the run-of-the-mill, back down to the mundane. Listen to him still echoes as they travel down to regular, everyday life. But it won't take long for the disciples or for us to find other things to focus on. We'll focus on making sure people believe the right things, that we're doing the Lord's Supper or baptism correctly. We'll argue endlessly about who we can or can't ordain, and we'll push "listen to him" off to the side. Now, I don't mean to pick on the church or on religion. Unlike some people, I don't believe it's possible to be spiritual but not religious. Any faith or spirituality that's going to impact your life in a meaningful way is going to have some practices, some methods of doing things, some way of interpreting it to other people, some expectations for others who want to join in, When I complain about religion, it's not because I want to get rid of it. I do not, and for that matter, nor do I think it's possible. And perhaps here it's helpful to remember that Jesus in his life was a faithful practitioner of his Jewish religion. He kept the Sabbath. He went to synagogue. He was well versed in his Hebrew scriptures, and he quoted them frequently. I don't think Jesus had any plans to abolish his own religion, or for that matter to start a new one. But he saw clearly how religious structures and habits get perverted and twisted and used for managing God, so that they don't help us as they should. Religion easily gets focused on the packaging rather than the core. It easily substitutes attendance and reverence and belief for doing what it's called to do. And so it needs to be reformed on a regular basis. It needs what happens in our scripture reading this morning. To encounter an awesome, unmanageable, definitely not user-friendly God. And it needs to hear the voice say, listen to him. Now I'm going to guess that most of you heard the command to listen some when you were growing up. Teachers, parents, coaches said to you, listen to me when I'm talking to you. Or ask us, are you listening to me? And we, at least I did, learned as a kid that there was a difference between hearing and listening. When listening got invoked, you were supposed to really pay attention. You were supposed to do what was being said. We came to understand that listen meant serious business. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. I've shared with you before a quote from Mohandas Gandhi, who said, I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. They are so unlike your Christ. And I suppose that to varying degrees, Gandhi's critique fits most of us. And this problem exists not because we don't believe in Jesus, or because we're not devout, or because we don't go to church enough. This problem exists because we do not do the one thing God explicitly commands followers of Jesus to do. Listen to him. We each have our own reasons, but for many of us, we're afraid what he might say, what he might ask us to do. We don't want to just ignore him, but we do. When we hear him talking to us, we do like like I used to do when my parents were calling me. I hear them, but I didn't listen. We hear Jesus speaking, but we remain oblivious. Sort of one of those, I guess, in one ear, out the other sort of thing. And I suppose that on some level, this is a core faith and belief issue. We're not sure if we can trust what Jesus tells us to do. We're not sure that if we go when he calls us, we'll end up somewhere we want to be. So we don't listen. We're a little like Peter here. We want to keep Jesus close, but we don't want to listen, and so we're ready to make shrines and have rituals. But then that voice speaks. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. I imagine most all of you are familiar with the phrase leap of faith. as when someone says, well, sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith. And to my ear, it sounds like it should be a religious phrase, but I don't generally hear it applied to Christian faith, at least not the believe in Jesus sort of Christian faith. It's usually reserved for things that seem to be a little more risky. Like when you take the chance that things will turn out great if you get married, or if you quit your job and go back to school, or if you start a new business or a non-profit ministry. It may pay off real big if you do those things. It may be wonderful. It may lead to a fuller and more meaningful life. But of course you have to take the chance, the risk. You have to take that leap into the unknown. This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him. Can we do it? Are we listening? All praise and glory to the God who comes to us in Jesus, who speaks to us, and who calls us to follow him. Thanks be to God.